but we're working on changing that.
Cool. And so these cave bats are the most susceptible to white nose syndrome.
Typically, yes. So when a lot of the cave bats, they hibernate. So bats that hibernate are really the most susceptible. And all bats really are susceptible to a degree. So some of the bats, they don't actually exhibit any of the symptoms of white nose syndrome, but they do carry this fungal spore. So because bats are very communal, and you'll see often mixed clusters, there'll be 3 or 4 species in a group. It's very easy for those species that may not, exhibit any symptoms. They can still spread this. So we're still trying to protect all the species, but some are more susceptible than others.
And so some don't show those symptoms. Does that mean that they're immune to it?
Again, it's not really immune. So the way white nose syndrome works, again, it's a cold-loving fungus. And what it tends to do is it attacks the wing membranes or any of the skin areas. Bats are the only flying mammal, so it tends to make holes in these wing membranes. But a large thing that it does is that it prevents true hibernation. So bats during their period of hibernation, they will wake on occasion and they will fly to a different part of the cave or to a new cave. However, they're not up for extended periods of time because they're hibernating mostly, because of the temperature, but also because of the lack of a food source, right? So if there's no insects to eat, all the bats at Craters of the Moon in the state of Idaho, they're insectivorous. There's no insects to eat, and you're flying around, you're not able to replenish, so they tend to starve to death. So if a bat is hibernating and they get white nose, there's sort of it's an irritant for them. So they wake up a lot more. They're more active during the winter months. They tend to starve to death. Other species that we have, they tend to migrate. So some of our tree-dwelling species, silver-haired, hoary bats, they are migratory. They don't really hibernate. So they're larger bats, and they don't need to worry about, this lack of insects because they're going to move with the insects. So they will carry the spore, but it doesn't affect them in the same ways that it would in other bat species.
And if they were getting the holes on their wings, does that affect their ability to fly?
So it absolutely. And depending on the bat species, some of them have thicker wing membranes. Bats in other parts of the world where this fungus is natively found, so where it's native, it's an invasive species in the United States, their wing membranes are a lot thicker. So you'll see some discoloration, but they're not actually making holes through the entire membrane. So that's one of those adaptations that bats are slowly going through to be able to fight white nose syndrome and the effects. However, adaptation, all that, it takes time. They're not just going to change overnight. So all that has to be, sort of bred out. So the bats with thicker wing membranes, those are the ones that survive. So they, reproduce, and then all of a sudden, their offspring have thicker wing membranes. And again, it's a slow change. So that is a large part of white nose, though.